The fluorescent lights in Massachusetts General Hospital's intensive care unit hummed with a frequency that made Sarah Chen's headache worse. She'd been sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside her mother's bed for 18 hours straight, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, counting each beep of the heart monitor like a prayer. Her mother, Linda Chen, 62 years old, lay motionless after suffering a massive stroke the previous morning. The doctors said the next 48 hours were critical. Sarah had called everyone, her husband Marcus, her 2 teenage daughters, her mother's friends from the library where she'd worked for 30 years. But the first person to arrive, sweeping into the ICU like she owned the place, was Aunt Margaret. Margaret Chen Wallace was Linda's younger sister by 3 years, though she'd spent a lifetime acting like the elder. She was 59, impeccably dressed even at 7 in the morning in a Burberry trench coat and heels that clicked authoritatively on the linoleum. Her highlighted blonde hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was attending a business meeting, not visiting her sister in critical condition. "Sarah!" Margaret's voice was crisp, controlled. "How is she?" "The same. They're monitoring her closely. The neurologist said there's significant damage to the left hemisphere, but they won't know the full extent until she wakes up. If she wakes up." Sarah's voice cracked on the last words. Margaret moved to the other side of the bed, studying Linda's face with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Not grief, exactly. Something more complicated. "You should go home," Margaret said after a moment. "Shower. Rest. I'll stay with her." "I'm not leaving." "Sarah, you look terrible." "When's the last time you ate?" Sarah couldn't remember. Time had become fluid since the phone call from the neighbor who'd found her mother collapsed in her garden, cell phone still in her hand. She'd been trying to call Sarah. That detail haunted her. Her mother's last conscious act had been reaching out for her daughter. "I'll eat later. I need to be here when she wakes up." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Always so stubborn, just like Linda. She said it like it wasn't a compliment. They sat in tense silence for several minutes. Sarah held her mother's hand, careful of the IV line, studying the familiar features now slack with unconsciousness. Her mother's hair, once jet black like Sarah's, had gone completely silver years ago. She wore it long, usually in a braid. Sarah had taken it out when the nurses first admitted her, spreading it across the pillow. It seemed important somehow, keeping that small dignity. The door opened and Dr. Patel entered, a young neurologist with kind eyes and steady hands. He'd been the one to explain the stroke to Sarah in careful detail, drawing diagrams, answering her frantic questions with patience. "Ms. Chen, Mrs. Wallace." He nodded to both of them. "I'm here to check on Linda's neurological responses. Fair warning, this might be difficult to watch, but it's necessary." He performed a series of tests, checking reflexes, shining lights in Linda's eyes, pressing on her sternum to test pain response. Sarah watched anxiously for any sign of awareness, any flicker of recognition. There was nothing. "Her pupils are reactive," Dr. Patel noted, making marks on his tablet. "That's a good sign. Brain swelling is stable. We're still waiting to see if she'll regain consciousness on her own." "And if she doesn't?" Margaret asked the question Sarah couldn't bring herself to voice. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, we continue supportive care and monitoring." He smiled gently at Sarah. "Keep talking to her. There's evidence that familiar voices can help." After he left, Sarah resumed her vigil, telling her mother about the girls, about Marcus, about trivial things from her day before the world had stopped. Margaret sat stiffly in the corner, checking her phone periodically. More family arrived as the morning progressed. Sarah's Uncle Robert, her mother's oldest brother, a retired accountant who still wore suits everywhere, his wife, Aunt Patricia, who immediately started crying and had to be comforted by the nurses, Sarah's cousin David, Robert's son, who worked in finance in New York and had driven up that morning. They crowded into the small ICU room despite the two-visitor rule, the nurses making exceptions for the circumstances. Sarah felt suffocated by their presence, by the hushed conversations, by the way they kept looking at her mother like she was already gone. It was Uncle Robert who first brought up the practical matters. "Has anyone contacted Linda's lawyer? There are things we need to know. About her will, her wishes for medical care." "It's too early for that," Sarah said sharply. "She's going to wake up." "Of course she is, dear," Aunt Patricia said in that tone that meant she didn't believe it at all. "But Robert's right. We should be prepared." "I have power of attorney," Sarah said. "Mom made sure of that years ago. I'll handle everything she needs." Margaret's head snapped up from her phone. "Power of attorney? Since when?" "Since she updated her estate planning 5 years ago, after Dad died. She never mentioned it to me." "No, why would she need to?" Sarah couldn't keep the edge from her voice. She'd never understood the dynamic between her mother and Margaret. They'd been close as girls, according to family stories, but something had fractured that relationship decades ago. Her mother never spoke about it. Margaret's expression hardened. "Because I'm her sister, her blood family. Not—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air. "Not what?" Sarah demanded. The tension in the room became suffocating. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Let's not do this here. Linda needs peace." But Margaret wasn't finished. She stood, walking to the foot of the bed, her hands gripping the rail. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the small room. "Sarah, there's something you need to know, something Linda should have told you years ago, but she was always a coward about difficult truths." Sarah's heart began to pound. "What are you talking about?" "You're not her real child." The words landed like physical blows. Sarah heard them, understood them individually, but couldn't process their meaning when strung together. The room went utterly silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. "What?" Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "You heard me. You're not Linda's biological daughter. She never gave birth to you. She adopted you when you were 3 days old, a private adoption that most of the family doesn't even know about." Sarah's vision blurred. She gripped the chair arm to steady herself. "That's not true. You're lying." "I'm not. Ask Robert. Ask Patricia. They know." Margaret's voice was almost gentle now, which somehow made it worse. "Linda got pregnant when she was 23, your age when you had Emily, but she lost the baby at 7 months, stillborn, a daughter. She was devastated, fell into a depression so deep we thought we'd lose her too." "Stop," Sarah said, but Margaret continued. "Your father, Daniel, he was the one who arranged the adoption. He knew someone who knew someone. You know how these things work. A young girl from Rhode Island, just 17, pregnant and desperate. She agreed to give up the baby privately. 3 days after you were born, Linda and Daniel brought you home. They told everyone Linda had been pregnant, that you were theirs. Only a few of us knew the truth." Sarah couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. She looked at Uncle Robert, at Aunt Patricia, seeking denial in their faces. She found only uncomfortable confirmation. "This is why you shouldn't have power of attorney," Margaret said. "You're not actually her child. Not really. The family should be making decisions about Linda's care, not—" "That's quite enough," the new voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned to see Dr. Patel standing in the doorway, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood an older man in a white coat, late 60s, with silver hair and an air of quiet authority. Dr. James Morrison, according to his badge, Chief of Neurology. "Mrs. Wallace, you need to leave," Dr. Morrison said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." "Excuse me." Margaret drew herself up to her full height. "I'm visiting my sister. You're creating a disturbance in my ICU and causing distress to a patient's primary caregiver. That ends now. Security will escort you out if necessary, Margaret's face flushed. You can't. I absolutely can. This is my unit. Ms. Chen has legal authority to make decisions for her mother, and I won't have you undermining that or attacking her at her mother's bedside. Leave. Take your relatives with you. For a moment, Margaret looked like she might argue further. Then she grabbed her Burberry bag and stalked toward the door. She paused next to Sarah, leaning down to whisper, "This isn't over. You're not family, no matter what papers Linda signed." After Margaret, Robert, Patricia, and David were ushered out by security, Dr. Morrison pulled a chair next to Sarah. "I apologize that you had to experience that. Family dynamics during medical crises can be challenging." Sarah couldn't speak. She was trembling, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Patel handed her tissues. "The things your aunt said," Dr. Morrison continued carefully, "I don't know if they're true or not. But I do know this. You've been here since your mother was admitted. You've held her hand, talked to her, advocated for her care. That's what makes you her daughter. Not biology, not genetics, love and presence." "But what if it's true?" Sarah finally managed. "What if if she's not?" "Then it doesn't change anything that matters," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "You're still the person she chose to have power of attorney. You're still the person she wanted making decisions for her. You're still her daughter in every way that counts." Dr. Patel nodded. "I've seen a lot of families in crisis. Trust me, being related by blood doesn't guarantee that people will show up. You're here. That's what matters." They left her alone then, and Sarah turned back to her mother's still face. She studied it, looking for signs of herself, or the absence of them. Her own eyes were darker than her mother's, her nose different, her face shape. But she'd always assumed she favored her father's side. Had she been blind? Had she missed obvious signs her whole life? She thought about her childhood, searching for clues, inconsistencies. There were none that she could remember. She had baby photos, though come to think of it, none from the hospital. Her birth certificate listed Linda and Daniel Chen as her parents. She'd never had reason to question it. Her phone buzzed. "Marcus. How's Mom? Girls asking about her. When should we come?" Sarah stared at the text, unable to formulate a response. How could she explain what just happened? She couldn't even process it herself. Instead, she squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, if you can hear me, I need you to wake up. I need you to tell me the truth, please." The monitor continued its steady beep. Her mother's face remained peaceful, unaware of the bomb Margaret had just detonated. Sarah stayed through the afternoon and into the evening. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, offering Sarah food and water she couldn't stomach. Dr. Patel checked in twice more, his presence calming. Around 8 p.m., as darkness fell outside the window, something changed. Sarah noticed it first in the monitor, a slight irregularity in the heartbeat pattern. Then her mother's fingers twitched. Once. Twice. "Mom?" Sarah leaned forward. "Mom, can you hear me?" Another twitch. Then her mother's eyes moved beneath her closed lids. Sarah hit the call button. "She's moving! My mother's moving!" Nurses rushed in, followed quickly by Dr. Patel. They surrounded the bed, checking responses, calling Linda's name, asking her to squeeze their hands if she could hear them. And slowly, miraculously, Linda Chen's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused at first, confused, trying to make sense of the lights and faces hovering over her. But then they found Sarah. And despite the stroke, despite the brain damage, despite everything, something flickered there. Recognition. Love. Linda's mouth moved. No sound came out. The stroke had affected her speech, but Sarah could read her lips. "Sarah. My Sarah." Sarah broke down completely, sobbing, holding her mother's hand to her face. "I'm here, Mom. I'm right here." The medical team worked efficiently, checking Linda's neurological responses now that she was conscious. She could move her right side, but not her left. She couldn't speak, though she could make sounds. Her eyes tracked movement and recognized faces. It was better than anyone had hoped. When they finally left Sarah and Linda alone, Sarah faced the question she'd been terrified to ask, but knew she had to. "Mom!" She had to stop, gather courage. "Aunt Margaret came today. She said something. She said I'm not your biological daughter, that you adopted me." Linda's eyes filled with tears immediately. She made a sound, frustrated, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Her right hand squeezed Sarah's desperately. "Is it true?" Sarah whispered. Linda nodded, once, definitively. Then she did something that would stay with Sarah forever. She brought Sarah's hand to her chest, over her heart, and held it there. Her eyes were fierce, insistent. The message was clear. "Biology doesn't matter. You're mine. You're my daughter. You're my heart." Sarah collapsed onto the bed rail, crying harder. "I don't care. I don't care if we're not related by blood. You're my mother. You'll always be my mother." Linda's tears matched her own. Mother and daughter, chosen if not born together, holding on to each other as the machines beeped and the hospital hummed around them. Outside the ICU, Margaret Chen Wallace sat in her Mercedes in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel. She made a phone call. "It's done," she said when someone answered. "I told her." Linda's awake now, but the damage is done. Sarah knows she's not really family. Now we move to phase 2, contesting the power of attorney. "I want that money, and I want control of Linda's care. She's got no business making decisions for my sister." The voice on the other end said something Margaret didn't like. Her face hardened. "I don't care what the doctors say. I don't care about legality. Linda is my blood, and I won't let some adopted charity case inherit everything our parents built. We do this my way, or I'll find lawyers who will." She hung up and stared at the hospital building, its lit windows like eyes judging her. But Margaret had never cared much for judgment. She cared about money, about control, about winning. And she always won. Chapter 2. The morning after Linda regained consciousness, Massachusetts General Hospital became a battlefield. Margaret arrived at 7 a.m. with an attorney, Bradford Pierce, from one of Boston's most aggressive law firms, the kind that handled hostile takeovers and bitter divorces. Sarah had spent the night in her mother's ICU room, dozing in the chair, waking every time a nurse checked vitals. She was disheveled, exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline. When Margaret swept in with Pierce trailing behind, Sarah's first instinct was to call security. "You're not supposed to be here," Sarah said, standing between them and her mother's bed. "Dr. Morrison banned you." "Dr. Morrison has no authority over who visits a patient," Pierce said smoothly. He was 50-something, with silver temples and an expensive suit. "Mrs. Wallace has every right to see her sister. Not when it upsets the patient." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "Get out." "We're not here to upset anyone," Margaret said, her voice saccharine. "We're here to discuss Linda's care, specifically her long-term care needs and who's qualified to make those decisions." "I'm qualified. I have power of attorney." "A power of attorney that may not be valid," Pierce interjected, "given that there are questions about whether proper disclosure was made regarding family relationships when that document was signed." Sarah stared at him. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means that if Linda didn't inform you that you were adopted when she granted you power of attorney, she may have been operating under false pretenses. Specifically, the assumption that biological family relationships create different obligations and considerations than adoptive ones." That's insane. Adoption is legally the same as biological parenthood. In some contexts, yes. But estate law is complex, particularly when it comes to contesting documents based on undue influence or lack of full disclosure. Margaret moved closer. "Sarah, this doesn't have to be a fight. We're family. Are we? Because yesterday you told me I'm not really family. You can't have it both ways. I said you're not her biological child. That's a fact, not an attack. But you're right, we are family in the broader sense, which is why I think we should work together on Linda's care. Make decisions collectively. Sarah looked at her mother. Linda was awake, watching the exchange with distress evident despite her limited mobility. Her right hand moved weakly, trying to reach for Sarah. Mom doesn't want you here, Sarah said. Look at her. You're upsetting her. She's had a stroke, Margaret said dismissively. She's confused, medicated. She doesn't know what she wants right now. That's exactly why decisions shouldn't rest solely with you. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened. Dr. Morrison entered, and his expression when he saw Margaret and Pierce went from professional to glacial. I believe I made myself clear yesterday, Mrs. Wallace. You're not welcome in this unit. Dr. Morrison, Pierce stepped forward. I'm Bradford Pierce, representing Margaret Wallace. We're here to discuss Linda Chen's care. My client has concerns about whether appropriate decision-making processes are being followed. Your client's concerns are noted and irrelevant. Ms. Chen has full legal authority as power of attorney for healthcare. That authority was properly executed and is entirely valid. Unless you have a court order stating otherwise, you need to leave. We'll have one by end of day, Pierce said confidently. We're filing an emergency petition this morning to contest the power of attorney and request a temporary guardian be appointed pending review. Sarah's stomach dropped. You're suing me? We're protecting Linda's interests, Margaret said. Someone has to. Get out. Dr. Morrison's voice was hard as steel. Now, or I'll have you escorted by police, not just security. You're disrupting patient care, and I won't tolerate it. Margaret and Pierce exchanged glances. Then Pierce handed Sarah a business card. You'll want to retain counsel. The hearing is scheduled for 3 p.m. today. Family Court. Judge Catherine Bradford presiding. They left. Sarah stood frozen, the business card trembling in her hand. This can't be happening, she whispered. Dr. Morrison sighed. I'm afraid it is. This is unfortunately not uncommon when there's money or property involved. Do you know anything about your mother's assets? Sarah shook her head numbly. She owns her house. She has savings, I think. She never discussed finances with me. She's only 62. We never thought about this stuff. You need a lawyer immediately. Do you have someone you can call? My husband's cousin is an attorney, family law. I'll call her. She did, right there from the ICU. Jessica Morales answered on the second ring, listened to Sarah's rushed explanation, and said she'd meet her at the courthouse at 2:30. The next few hours passed in a blur. Sarah called Marcus, who immediately left work to come to the hospital. She called her daughters, told them Grandma was awake, but there were complications. She couldn't bring herself to explain the adoption revelation or the lawsuit. Not yet. She spent time with her mother, who grew increasingly agitated as the morning progressed. Linda couldn't speak, but her eyes were eloquent. She kept trying to tell Sarah something, getting frustrated when the words wouldn't form. It's okay, Mom, Sarah kept saying, though nothing was okay. Just rest. I'll handle this. But Linda shook her head violently, tears streaming. She grabbed Sarah's hand, pulled her close, and forced out sounds that weren't quite words, but were laden with urgency and desperation. She's trying to tell you something, the nurse, a middle-aged woman named Rita, observed. After a stroke, sometimes patients can write even when they can't speak. Has anyone tried that? Sarah grabbed a notepad and pen from the bedside table. She pressed the pen into her mother's right hand. Linda's fingers were weak, clumsy, but she managed to scratch out letters. Safe. Sarah frowned. What's safe, Mum? Linda's hand shook, but she continued writing, painstaking letter by letter. Safe Box Bank. You have a safe deposit box? At the bank? Linda nodded frantically. She tried to write more, but exhaustion was taking over. That's enough, Rita said gently. She needs to rest. Too much stress isn't good for stroke recovery. Just one more thing, Mom. What's in the safe deposit box? Linda's eyes were beginning to close, but she forced out one more sound. It took Sarah a moment to understand. Truth? The smallest nod. Then Linda's eyes closed and she slipped into exhausted sleep. The emergency hearing at Boston Family Court started exactly at 3 p.m. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah expected, nothing like TV courtrooms. Judge Catherine Bradford was a stern woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on her nose and zero patience for nonsense, according to Jessica's whispered assessment. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table with Bradford Pierce and another attorney Sarah didn't recognize. She'd changed into a black dress suit and pearls, looking every inch the concerned sister. Sarah and Jessica sat at the defendant's table. Jessica had spent the previous hour going over the case, reviewing the power of attorney document, preparing Sarah for questions. This should be straightforward, Jessica had said. The power of attorney is ironclad. They don't have grounds. But be prepared. They're going to try to make you look unfit or suspicious. Don't take the bait. Answer honestly and calmly. Judge Bradford called the court to order. Pierce stood to present his case. Your Honor, this emergency petition concerns Linda Chen, currently hospitalized at Massachusetts General following a severe stroke. My client, Margaret Wallace, is Ms. Chen's sister and closest biological relative. We're here because there are serious questions about whether the current power of attorney holder Sarah Chen should continue in that role. On what grounds? Judge Bradford asked. Several, Your Honor. First, Miss Sarah Chen is not Linda Chen's biological daughter. She's adopted. This wasn't disclosed when the power of attorney was executed, which raises questions about undue influence and whether Linda Chen would have made the same decision had full family relationships been transparent. Adoption creates the same legal parent-child relationship as biology, Judge Bradford said flatly. You know that, Counselor. Of course, Your Honor. But the second issue is more concerning. We have reason to believe that Sarah Chen has been isolated from Linda Chen for several years, that their relationship has been distant, and that Linda may have been pressured into signing documents that don't reflect her current wishes. Sarah started to object, but Jessica put a hand on her arm. Third, there are significant assets at stake. Linda Chen owns property worth approximately $800,000, has savings and investments totaling nearly $500,000, and life insurance policies worth another $300,000. Sarah Chen stands to inherit most or all of this. Given the circumstances, we believe a neutral third party should be appointed as temporary guardian pending a full investigation. Ms. Morales. Judge Bradford turned to Jessica. Response? Jessica stood. Your Honor, this is a transparently frivolous attempt by my client's aunt to gain control of her sister's assets. The power of attorney was properly executed 5 years ago by attorneys at Whitfield and Associates, one of Boston's most respected firms. It explicitly names Sarah Chen as healthcare and financial decision-maker. There was no requirement to disclose that Sarah was adopted because it's legally irrelevant. She is Linda Chen's daughter in every legal sense. As for the allegation of distance in their relationship, that's demonstrably false. Sarah has been at her mother's bedside continuously since the stroke. She's the person Linda Chen wanted making decisions, as evidenced by the legal documents she chose to execute. Margaret Wallace, by contrast, was banned from the ICU yesterday for creating a disturbance and has now weaponized her sister's medical crisis in an apparent attempt to gain access to her finances. Pierce stood. Your Honor, if I may— You may not. I haven't finished, Judge Bradford said coolly. She reviewed the documents in front of her. I see here that Linda Chen regained consciousness last night. Has she been able to communicate at all regarding her wishes? She has limited communication, Jessica said. The stroke affected her speech, but she's been able to use gestures and has shown clear preference for having Sarah make decisions. That's not the same as competent consent, Pierce argued. She's medicated, confused, dealing with brain trauma. She can't meaningfully participate in these decisions right now. Which is exactly why power of attorney documents exist, Judge Bradford said. They're created when people are competent precisely for situations when they're not. She closed the file in front of her. Here's what we're going to do. I'm ordering a temporary guardian ad litem to be appointed, not to replace Sarah Chen, but to investigate and report back to this court. The guardian will interview hospital staff, review Linda Chen's care, assess the family dynamics, and provide recommendations. Sarah Chen retains power of attorney pending that investigation. Hearing is continued for 14 days. Pierce started to object, but Judge Bradford cut him off. That's my ruling, Counselor. You can appeal if you like, but I don't recommend it. This court doesn't look kindly on family members who weaponize medical crises for financial gain. If that's what's happening here, there will be consequences. Understood? Yes, Your Honor, Pierce said stiffly. As they filed out of the courtroom, Margaret grabbed Sarah's arm. This isn't over. Let go of me. You think you've won? You think because you spent 33 years playing dress-up as Linda's daughter that you actually are one? You're not. You're a stranger she took pity on. And when Linda dies, and she will die, strokes like this don't end well. You'll get nothing. I'll make sure of that. Sarah jerked her arm free. Is that what this is about? Money? Mom is lying in a hospital bed fighting for her life, and all you care about is money? I care about what's rightfully mine, what my parents built, what should stay in the family, real family. I am real family, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I'm more family than you've ever been. When was the last time you visited Mom? Called her? Remembered her birthday? I was there. I'm always there. That's what makes family, not DNA. She walked away before Margaret could respond, Jessica beside her. In the hospital parking garage, Sarah finally broke down. Jessica held her while she sobbed, all the fear and exhaustion and betrayal pouring out. We need to get into that safe deposit box, Jessica said when Sarah could breathe again. Whatever your mother wants you to know, it's there. Do you have access? I don't know. I've never even been to her bank. I don't know which bank it is. We'll figure it out. Your power of attorney should give you access to her accounts. We'll start there. They went to Bank of America first, the branch closest to Linda's house. The manager, a sympathetic woman named Patricia, reviewed Sarah's power of attorney documents and confirmed Linda had accounts there, including a safe deposit box. I can give you access, Patricia said, but I'll need to verify with our legal department first, given the circumstances you've described. Can you give me until tomorrow? Sarah agreed, though every instinct screamed at her to demand access now. Whatever her mother wanted her to know, Margaret was probably trying to get to it first. That night, Sarah returned to the hospital to find her mother significantly more alert. The speech therapist had been working with her, and while Linda still couldn't form clear words, she could make more sounds, and her yes-no responses were definitive. Mom, Sarah said, pulling a chair close. I went to court today. Aunt Margaret is trying to take away my power of attorney. She says I don't have the right to make decisions for you because I'm adopted. Linda's face contorted with rage. She made sounds that were clearly curses, her right hand slapping the bedrail. The judge appointed someone to investigate, but for now I'm still in charge. We're going to the bank tomorrow to access your safe deposit box. Is that what you want? An emphatic nod. What's in there, Mom? What's so important? Linda grabbed the notepad again. It took several minutes, but she managed to write 3 words. Your real mother. Sarah's world tilted again. "What?" Linda pointed to the words, then at Sarah, her expression desperate. She wrote more, even slower. "Margaret lied." "About what? Mom, what did Margaret lie about?" But Linda was exhausted, her hand falling limply. The nurse came in, gave her medication, and within minutes she was asleep again. Sarah sat stunned, staring at the notepad. "Your real mother," Margaret lied. What did that mean? The next morning, Sarah met Jessica at Bank of America. Patricia had gotten approval and led them to the vault. She unlocked Linda's safe deposit box and left them in a private room. Inside the metal box were documents, birth certificates, legal papers, letters, and photographs. Sarah picked up the top photograph with shaking hands. It showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair and Asian features, holding a newborn baby. The woman was smiling, but there were tears on her cheeks. Sarah flipped it over. Written on the back in faded ink, "Margaret Chen with baby Sarah, April 18th, 1992, the hardest day of my life." "Oh my God," Jessica breathed, looking over Sarah's shoulder. There were more photos. Margaret, much younger, visibly pregnant. Margaret in a hospital bed, holding a newborn. Margaret crying while an older couple, Sarah recognized Linda and Daniel, held the baby. Sarah picked up a legal document, a private adoption agreement dated April 1992. Birth mother, Margaret Chen. Adoptive parents, Linda Chen and Daniel Chen. "Margaret is my mother," Sarah whispered. "Not Linda, Margaret." Jessica was reading another document. "There's more. Look at this." It was a letter dated April 1992 in Margaret's handwriting. "Linda, I know you'll take care of her better than I ever could. I'm not ready to be a mother. I have plans, ambitions, a life I want to live, and she deserves more than I can give her. But you need to promise me something. Promise you'll never tell her the truth. As far as Sarah knows, you're her mother and I'm her aunt. That's how it has to be. I don't want her looking at me someday and asking why I gave her away. I don't want to be reminded of this mistake every time I see her. I'm doing this for both of us. You get the daughter you lost. I get my freedom. Everyone wins. Destroy this letter after you read it. I mean it, Linda. Destroy everything. We never speak of this again. Margaret." But Linda hadn't destroyed it. She'd kept everything, every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. There were more letters in the box, letters from Margaret over the years, mostly demanding money. 15,000 in 1995 to start her business, 20,000 in 2001 for her husband's medical bills, 50,000 in 2010 when her husband left her. Each letter had a veiled threat. If Linda didn't help, Margaret would tell Sarah the truth. "She's been blackmailing your mother for 33 years, Jessica said quietly, "threatening to tell you that she's your biological mother unless Linda paid her." Sarah felt numb. Her entire life was a lie. Not the lie, she thought. Linda wasn't her adoptive mother who'd kept the secret. Linda was her adoptive mother who'd been forced to keep the secret to protect Sarah from the truth. That her biological mother was a narcissist who'd abandoned her, then spent decades extorting the woman who'd saved her. At the bottom of the box was one more document. Linda's will, updated just 6 months ago. It left everything to Sarah, with an explicit statement that Margaret Chen Wallace was to receive nothing. And a letter sealed addressed to Sarah. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and you found the truth I tried to protect you from. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you so many times, but Margaret's threats kept me silent. She said if you knew it would destroy you. Maybe she was right. Maybe she was just manipulating me. I'll never know. Here's what you need to understand. I am your mother. Not because I gave birth to you, but because I chose you every single day for 33 years. I changed your diapers and stayed up through your fevers and taught you to read and held you when your first boyfriend broke your heart. I walked you down the aisle at your wedding and sobbed with joy when you had Emily and Grace. Margaret gave birth to you, but she was never your mother. She gave you away like you were an inconvenience and never looked back. The only time she's shown interest in you is when she wanted money from me. I've left everything to you, not just because I love you, but because you deserve it. Margaret deserves nothing. Don't let her guilt or manipulate you. Don't let her claim some biological bond means she gets to be part of your life now. You are my daughter, my real daughter, my chosen daughter, and I would choose you again 1,000 times over. I love you more than words can express. Mom Sarah read it 3 times before she could speak. Jessica sat beside her, quietly supportive. "What do I do?" Sarah finally asked. "We go back to court," Jessica said firmly. "We show the judge everything, the letters, the blackmail, Margaret's pattern of financial exploitation. This changes everything." The emergency hearing reconvened 2 days later. This time, Sarah had ammunition. Jessica presented the contents of the safe deposit box methodically. The birth records showing Margaret was Sarah's biological mother, the adoption papers, the letters showing Margaret had demanded money for 33 years under threat of revealing the truth, Linda's will explicitly disinheriting Margaret. "Your Honor," Jessica said, "this isn't about whether Sarah is qualified to make decisions for Linda Chen. This is about Margaret Wallace trying to gain access to her sister's estate, an estate she believes she's entitled to, despite decades of extortion and abandonment of her biological daughter." Pierce tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that she made poor decisions as a young woman. But that doesn't change the fact that she's Linda Chen's closest blood relative." "Stop right there," Judge Bradford interrupted. "I've heard enough. Ms. Wallace, stand up." Margaret stood reluctantly. "You gave up your daughter. Then you spent 3 decades extorting money from your sister under threat of telling that daughter the truth. Now that your sister is incapacitated, you see an opportunity to claim assets you believe should be yours. Is that accurate?" "Your Honor, Yes or no?" Margaret's face was pale. "The situation is more complicated. Yes or no?" A long pause. Then, "Yes." Judge Bradford's expression was disgusted. "Here's my ruling. Sarah Chen retains full power of attorney for health care and financial matters for Linda Chen. Margaret Wallace is barred from contact with Linda Chen or Sarah Chen except through counsel. If Ms. Wallace attempts to contest Linda Chen's will after her death, and I note that I hope that death is many years away, this court's findings today will be submitted as evidence of her character and motives." She leaned forward. "Ms. Wallace, you are one of the most selfish, manipulative people I've had the misfortune to see in my courtroom. You abandoned your child, extorted your sister, and are now trying to profit from that sister's medical crisis. You disgust me. Get out of my courtroom." Margaret fled, Pierce hurrying after her. Sarah sat stunned. "That went well," Jessica said with a small smile. 2 weeks later, Linda was transferred from ICU to a rehabilitation facility. Her speech was slowly returning, though she'd never fully recover. She could walk with assistance. Her mind was sharp. On Sarah's first visit to the rehab facility, Linda took her daughter's hand and said, slowly but clearly, "I love you, my daughter." "I love you too, Mom," Sarah said. And she meant it, because she'd learned that family wasn't about biology. It was about choice, about showing up, about love demonstrated day after day, year after year. Margaret had given birth to her. But Linda had been her mother, and nothing, not DNA, not court cases, not cruel revelations, could change that truth. 6 months later, Linda was well enough to move into Sarah's house. She needed care, but she was alive, present, still Sarah's mother in every way that mattered. They never heard from Margaret again. She'd moved to Florida, according to mutual acquaintances, started over somewhere no one knew her history. Sometimes Sarah wondered if she should feel something about her biological mother, anger maybe, or grief for what could have been. But mostly she felt nothing. Margaret was a stranger who'd contributed genetic material. Linda was her mother, and that was all the family Sarah needed.